Hello there. This is Peter Adkison. I'm here with Steve Conard. Steve Conard and I are the co-directors of the Chaldea series, and we are here today to take a deeper delve into the lore of the Drasildar. The Drasildar is a unique Chaldea creature that we have in our story, plays a big part of our story. It's in our artwork. And if you just watched chapter 3, which came out recently, you saw Drasildar in this story. So we thought we would talk a little bit more about them and where they came from. So the Drasildar actually goes clear back to classic Chaldea, what I call the Chaldea of the way we played it as a Dungeons and Dragons campaign back in the 1980s and ever since, but fervently in the 80s. And Steve Conard here was a player in my campaign. So I don't know, why don't we kind of start there, Steve? What's your memory of the Drasildar? What was it like playing in Chaldea in those days with Drasildar haunting the swamp of Cone?
Well, the funny thing is that none of my characters actually ever fought one. I was never stupid enough to fight one. We played a high level campaign, but a lot of our characters took a long time to get there. Or my primary character took a long time. Eventually, I ascended and became a supported demigod. Even then, I never actually fought one personally. They were in the lore of the world. And so from that point of view, we knew him by reputation, but not by actually anybody mixing it up with them. So we were terrified by the boogeyman under the bed. There was a lot of times we knew that the Drasildar came from the Swamp of Cone, and we were talking, which is right off the Garnon Forest, and we had adventures in the Garnon Forest, but we never went into the Swamp of Cone. We were, that's the terrible place. People go in, they don't come out. Well, that's actually a place where people go in and they literally don't come out, right? And so we were never dumb enough to go in there. The funny thing, the thing that you introduced, that was like the White Lotus and the Black Lotus. So the Black Lotus was this poison that if you got hit with it, there was no saving throw. It's like you got hit with it, you're dead. And if your White Lotus is no longer how long you were dead, if you had like a piece of skin, you could bring somebody back to life. The only places those could be acquired was in the Swamp of Cone. And so, well, yeah, we'll go in there. And it was crazy expensive. I don't remember, it was like 1 million gold pieces or something for a dose. I mean, it was just crazy high, and most of us didn't even have it. So we're like, oh, we could go in there and get rich. The only person that went in there was a couple of high-level barbarians that we knew, and they would do these, what they called the Swamp of Cone runs. And they would run in there, and on the run, they would grab Lotus, and then they would run out. And then, because they were afraid of the Drasildar that were in there. And we were like, oh, we'll go in with you. It's like, no, you're not high enough level. And it's like, well, we have this and this and this. It's like, well, you can't take magic with you. You have to do it completely with a mundane sword, because they will just destroy you. Anybody who has magic, they will just destroy you, right? So here's this high-level person we really respected going, no, you cannot fight them. So, I mean, that was just one example of how we knew who they were. Probably about, I don't know how many years, it must have been 10 years playing in Chaldea or something, we finally had this super high-level raid. And we had every highest level character on the planet seemed to be in this raid. And when the baddies were revealed, we went into this throne room. When the baddies were revealed, there were like liches, and there were high-level demons and all this stuff. And then there was a Drasildar, and everybody just went, holy shit. And that's the one time I actually saw one on a battlefield, and we could talk about it later.
Was that the one Lon Canada was in on?
Yes.
Yeah. One of the players, Lon. He created character Valdespar, which we'll see in our series at some point, not anytime soon, but eventually. And what is it he went after with? Well, we were playing D&D, so back in the day, I think it was the Mace of St. Cuthbert. He went up and swung it at the Drasildar, and this mace, this artifact from the DMG, which we always held as sort of the highest esteem of artifacts, and it shattered.
Yeah, we called them book artifacts.
Book artifacts. The book artifact.
I don't know what a book artifact was. It was from the book.
Yeah, book. The Dungeon Master's Guide. Those were So
he goes up there and he swings it, and you made him roll a dominance roll, and it missed its dominance roll, and the handle cracked.
Yeah.
That was really bad. It was a double odd artifact. It was horrible. What made the story even more, well, horrible from Lon's point of view was he didn't actually own the Mace of St. Cuthbert. He had borrowed it from the Church of Ra.
He
So
checked
he
it
borrowed
out.
it for this high-level raid. He's like, I'll bring it back when I'm done. But he didn't bring it back.
Yeah,
Because he dared swing it out of Drasildar.
That's right. Yeah. He was very high up in the church, I must say. I don't know if he eventually was a demigod of Ra. I don't know if he was at the time of that raid or not. But
I think he actually borrowed it from the champion of Ra.
Yeah.
So Lon might fix this if you know.
Yeah. Well, Lon, if he ever sees this, he'll set the story straight. Yeah. So what I was trying to do with the Drasildar, and first of all, I thought a little bit about the inspirations. We didn't call them Drasildar back then. We called them swamp demons. There was some inspiration from a wonderful piece of art by Frank Frazetta called Swamp Demon. And I remember seeing that piece of art at Influential Age and go, man, that is a badass demon. And I kind of melded the inspiration from that and also the classic shambling mound from the Monster Manual. I don't know why that thing always struck a chord with me. But I created this creature, which came to Drasildar, and it was from the Swamp of Cone. That was you have a really nasty creature. You have to have a really nasty environment, worthy of the home of this creature. And I think every DM has this moment where they just want the ultimate monster. In D&D it might be the
Tarrasque,
the Tarrasque or what have you. Well, in Chaldea, yeah, the Drasildar was the sort of the ultimate monster. And of course, high level D&D, what do players have that's so powerful is all their magic, right? Or psionics or anything like that. So I made the Drasildar as a creature that was that somehow inherent to their makeup would subvert the intent of anything supernatural. So if you had magic, not only would magic not work against them, it would backfire. It would turn the intent of the magic against the wielder or psionics. And so the reason the only individuals who were ever successful in dealing with the Drasildar were these two NPCs that were super, super high level barbarians is because they were barbarians. I mean, they were like, we don't need a bunch of magic. We're just like tough on our own, super high level, super strong, blah, 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 and fast as barbarians might be perceived to be, and so that was kind of their secret. And they would go in and they were these legendary NPCs that would go in and they had kind of the monopoly, the world supply chain of Black Lotus went through them,
Well, and even they never stopped running. They called it the Swamp of Cone Run, right? They would run and not stop. They said, if you stop, you will die.
Yeah, the cone run, the swamp run, something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Of course, that sounded so cool. We were like, oh, someday we're going to do it. They're like, even if we were high level, they're like, no.
You guys are high enough level to hang out with us.
They're not high enough level.
They probably just didn't want to share the monopoly, right? Want anybody know the secrets? Who knows? I don't know. I think at one time we were going to do the swamp run as an adventure. We just never got around to it. I think I was like, well, I don't want to kill you all,
Well, right. I think it was like they said, okay, strip down to nothing, go in nude pick up a mundane, broadsword, and that was it. Let's go. I remember Yo and I were going to go do it, right? Okay, let's do it. And it's like, even at the end of the day, it's like, no, you're not going to survive. Like, okay. So that shows you the level of where these guys are at.
Yeah, they you might have survived. They might have been just kind of intimidating you. Who knows? So, the other thing that, as sort of an ultimate GM monster, if you will, from back in the day, is that the Drasildars were amazing guardians. You could put a Drasildar guarding, a treasure trove or guarding, whatever you wanted it to guard. And one of the abilities of the Drasildar is that they could see any potential way into the area they were guarding, through planes, through dimensions, through warps, space, time continuums. However, I don't care what you came up with. If they were on guard, you had to go through them somewhat literally in order to get to what they were guarding. Or on the other way, if they're guarding something, if they're trapping something, for that entity to get out. And so that was kind of how one might encounter Drasildar outside the Swamp of Cone, is if somehow it had been convinced to guard, say, the lair of an elder dragon or something crazy like that. And since and so later, jumping ahead, I guess a bit, when we decided to illustrate the Drasildar, I think Steve, you had the idea. Well, let's put all these eyes all over them. These eyes are like, maybe different eyes are seeing into different types of planes and dimensions and stuff. And as well, these eyes are for, which is a good way to kind of symbolize artistically that ability of the Drasildar.
They have bark-like skin. They have somewhat of a tree-like physique, and there's certain trees that have on their bark have these eyes. I'm sure there's some botanist or somebody would be able to tell me that there's a specific name for that.
Yeah,
but that's where they're designed from.
Well, and like I already said, we nullified all the powerful abilities that powerful characters might have, like supernatural abilities and magic abilities. So this ability of the Drasildar was a great attempt to bring everything to where the Drasildar was strong inherently, which was physical combat. So the Drasildar had super high regeneration and super high damage reduction, and super high hit points. So if you're up there swinging on the Drasildar, its absorption is negating huge percentage of the damage coming in. It's got super amount of hit points, and then it's regenerating massive amounts of hit points all at the same time. I think some of that is where you see the influence of the Shambling Mound out of Monster Manual. To be honest, I don't remember the stats on the Shambling Mound, but I do remember it had a lot of sort of damage reduction sort of abilities, and it made him pretty badass,
to say the least.
So when we jumping forward to 7 years ago now, I guess 2013, I guess is the year when Steve and I decided, hey, let's take Chaldea and create a story. We of course realized that going through and just telling the adventures that we did in playing Dungeons and Dragons, those aren't really actually good stories. We have to be a little bit more professional about this and really have to up our game and think a little bit more deeply about all these concepts. And so with the Drasildar, we evolved what the Drasildar were and what their purpose is to fit our story. One of those things is that we decided, well, I'd never paid attention, thought much about where the Drasildar came from, but we created a entity that is in the Swamp of Cone named Cone. I mean, now suddenly we have a reason why it's called the Swamp of Cone, and the Drasildar are her spawn. So that's where the Drasildar come from. And in our story, Emperor Kordaava, somehow in the backstory years ago, he was able to forge an alliance with the Drasildar, or with Cone, or some combination thereof. And when Kordaava went and conquered all of Chaldea and took it over, became emperor, the Drasildar were a key part of his military might. So if you imagine these big, tall, 20+ foot creatures with that are all super powerful, it'd be like if there was a fight between two medieval armies, but one of the medieval armies had mechs. I think that's about the right sort of analogy to it. I mean, these things were god awful, and could and while there were a lot of other powerful creatures in Chaldea, of course, like giants and Tavjan lions and dragons and so forth, by the time Kordaava was done, there was no question as to who the big boss monsters of Chaldea were, because with not only his personal might, but with the might of these Drasildar by his side, Kordaava was able to go and kill or pound into submission all the major super powerful creatures of Chaldea that otherwise might have opposed him.
Well, and also after he became emperor, in the continent of Samaria, which is this chaos sort of continent, it's untamed, there's in the mountains of chaos, there's this thing called the Veil, which is like this perpetual storm that exists that just goes up into the sky, and that veil, it connects other worlds, almost any world. And so occasionally, demon lords or crazy Cthulhian creatures or who knows what wanders through the veil. And of course, Kordaava, this is my world now. And so every once in a while, he would have to get off his throne, take a couple Drasildar with him into Samaria, beat down a demon lord. Sort of like Muhammad Ali occasionally would okay, who am I going to beat up today to show that I'm the greatest in the world? I'm the greatest. So yeah, so people constantly were reinforced that they were badass.
Right. That's right. And also in our backstory, specifically in our backstory, two elder dragons, Kordaava, with the help of a couple Drasildar, went and killed. And I think if you were to go into Chaldea and go back in time to, when Emperor Kordaava was on his rise and ask who the most powerful creatures were in Chaldea, most people probably would have said, "Oh, I think the elder dragons are the most badass." But yeah, turns out that no, it was the Drasildar.
Well, yeah, the Chaldea is the home world of dragons, where dragons come from. And of course, when this little upstart comes along, this Kordaava who, and he's taken over the world, the dragons, a few of them were like, no, this is our world. And then they went after him, and whoa, I guess they shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, well, of course, somebody has to test. Somebody comes out and says, I'm a demigod. I'm going to, my goal is to take over this plane because, like in the primal order, to become a full deity, you have to take over a plane and control it. Those are our rules. So that's the way it's got to work. Well, it seems pretty clear. I don't think it's a big spoiler that's what Kordaava was up to. What Emperor Kordaava took over the plane as a demigod, and his goal was to rule Chaldea for as long as necessary to ultimately become a full deity in his own right. And was well on his way to doing that before he was mysteriously assassinated.
There's always somebody bigger. So that leads up to, around Chaldea, there's all kinds of big nasties. They could be good, they could be evil, who knows what. But if you're going, okay, I'm controlling this plane, you actually have to control it. You can't have other people walking around and causing problems. And so what Kordaava did was he put the Drasildar to basically whack-a-mole.
Yes.
Your job is to sit on this particular person or thing, or case of like Niche, with the fortresses of Niche, your job is to sit here and make sure these guys are under control, don't get out of hand, their parties don't get too big.
Right. So, so phase one was conquering Chaldea, taking over the world. Phase two is how do you keep it, right? And Kordaava managed to rule Chaldea for 40 years before he was assassinated. And one of his a main reason he was able to control Chaldea was with these Drasildar. And so shortly after he took over Chaldea, he took these 100 Drasildar that he had, and he stationed them all over Chaldea, and he assigned them in different ways. He kept a number of them as his personal guard. So, up until the day he died, if you went to see Kordaava at his, at the Imperial Palace in Saratov, in his throne room, there were 20 Drasildar. That was his personal bodyguard. A huge statement of power and presence. He also assigned Drasildar to his legions. So in chapter 103, we see quite a few shots of a Drasildar that is at Enchantment's Guard. We see that this Drasildar had some sort of relationship with the young Reiswitz. And we also see that moments before Helvig and his staff hear about the death of Emperor Kordaava, the Drasildar that is there at Enchantment's Guard suddenly leaves, suddenly splits. And it turns out that is happening all over the world. That they will learn, the heroes will learn that everywhere in the world where there was a Drasildar, when Kordaava died, all these Drasildar abandoned their posts. And other posts were things like, Steve mentioned the fortresses of Niche. There were 5. Niche is the capital of the Orc Empire, and it is an underground, subterranean, undercroft sort of city in the heart of the Divinity Mountains. And to get there, you have to go through one of 5 fortresses that surround it that are sort of the gateway between the surface world and the underworld. And each of these great fortresses, originally built by the dwarves, each of those fortresses had a Drasildar standing right out in front of it. Only those Drasildar was not to keep people from going in. Those Drasildar were there to keep people from coming out, specifically the orcs.
Yeah, so when you watch War Room, not too much of a spoiler, when they they start worrying about orcs, it's because they know that the Drasildar is no longer there to keep them.
Yeah. If you're wondering why did they so quickly jump to the conclusion that that Niche would now be a threat, Surinel, the ruler of Niche and the Orc Empire, were suddenly a threat to them, it's because they very well knew that Emperor Kordaava, it was his power and the power of his Drasildar that were keeping the orcs in submission. And a key piece of that was putting these Drasildar around these outside of these fortresses, not to keep people out of Niche, but to keep the orcs inside of Niche from leaving and preying upon the humans in the nearby area. But now they're gone.
Similarly, a little bit of a spoiler here, not generally wide known across Chaldea, but in the kingdom of Perrin, there's the legendary city of the dead. Ebercorum, right? And there's one, the locals might heard rumors that there's this beast that stands outside the gates of Ebercorum, the city of the dead. And yeah.
Well, and
to keep people from going in. Most people are not crazy enough to want to go in to the city of the dead.
Right. It's way out in the wilderness. And certainly some people in the Legion know about it because there is a cohort of the Imperial Legion that is stationed there. And, but it's way off in the mountains. Nobody knows. And one reason we're talking about this, you will hear more about this particular Drasildar and the city of the dead and what's happening there in a book that we will be releasing this spring as a digital book called Discordia in the Port of Stone. So Kordaava placed these Drasildar as his personal guard. He assigned a bunch of them to the military. All the legions have at least one, maybe 2 Drasildar. They were assigned to keep the orcs in. Basically assigned to places where there was something that needed to be guarded, either to protect something, so like a bunch of the imperial vaults that have some of the wealth of the empire were guarded by Drasildar, or to keep something inside to protect because it's a threat to people outside, like in Ebercorum or like the orcs. I think there's also some places where the locals would know that there's a Drasildar off in the forest place in the secret vale, and people actually not quite sure what the Drasildar is doing there, but they know that it must have some reason for being there.
Well, you can be guaranteed that a Drasildar doesn't stand around twiddling its thumbs for no reason. If it's somewhere, there's something there of importance, of a value, or trying to keep something protected.
Yeah, one would think, right? Yeah, Kordaava probably, this valuable resource of these 100 Drasildar, Kordaava probably isn't going to waste one sticking it somewhere for no particular reason whatsoever. And so, if you've been watching our Chaldea videos and you think it might be interesting to ever run an RPG session in Chaldea, this is, I think, kind of an interesting template for an adventure. You could run an adventure, and the idea is that there's a Drasildar in the local area, and this Drasildar has suddenly abandoned its post. Well, now, what does that mean? Like, what was the Drasildar doing there? What was it guarding, or what was it protecting, or what was it protecting you from the local people? And adventurers, gravers, as we call them in Chaldea, might be encouraged to go check it out, and it could lead to all sorts of adventures. So we think that could be a fun way for people to have fun in our world, to come up with sort of Drasildar abandons their post sort of adventures.
Yes, we have a Kordaavan informant article. If you go to our website, with each chapter we release, our newspaper called the Kordaavan informant, has a bunch of different articles that's related to things going on in the world. And when the Drasildar all leave their post, there's an article that talks about the Drasildar leaving. And it's a great way, like you said, to start an adventure. Okay, the Drasildar has now left. Now what do you do? I would recommend that you wait for the Drasildar to leave.
Yes.
I don't care who your GM is. Don't go there while he's still actively looking around and sniffing about.
Or try to chase one, like, where'd it go? Well, let's go find out where it went. I mean, that seems like a reasonable, that could turn into a reasonable adventure, as long as you don't actually catch up with the Drasildar. That would be bad.
Getting with arm's length is not wise.
No.
Well, something as big named as Drasildar and, their legends, somebody somewhere, maybe some bard somewhere in Dorsang would be like, I'm going to document, and see if I can figure out where all these Drasildar are. I'm not even sure if, like, in the world of Chaldea at the time of Kordaava, if they know there's 100. It's unclear whether or not he said, yeah, there's 100. I mean, he might say there's 200 or 500 or 1,000, right? Keep that sort of ambiguous, yeah. Right? Coming from the world of D&D, we like to just document everything. But anyway, I could see somebody like a bard coming along and going, okay, I'm just going to go and document all these and run around and see if you could
travel the world, ask the locals, sort of a Nabu Pabu of our time, but for Drasildar. Yeah.
Right. And you could just see, oh, go to this place. There's one there. And you go there and it's not even a Drasildar at all. It might be a troll under a bridge.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think, so I think there's a lot of ambiguity about where all the Drasildar are, how many there are within Chaldea. And also, I think that would be stimulated by Kordaava himself. I mean, while he was emperor, I think he certainly would have wanted to shroud it in mystery as to exactly how many of them there were and exactly where they all were.
Yes, for sure. It's interesting. He holds court. I don't remember how often he holds court. Twice a year, I think, is what it is. And this when all the nobles from around the world all show up. I remember role playing this one time. And everybody spends like a couple days preparing. Everybody's given suites and places to stay within the imperial capital, and then everybody shows up on the day of court. And of course, everybody files in this just glorious Egyptian court setting, and all the way around are these 20 Drasildar standing around. It's very obvious, like he's flexing his muscles. 20 of them. They're up above in the airy, looking down. They're behind his throne. They're all the way around. They're walking behind the people coming in, and they're sniffing at people. It's scary. That's 20. Probably don't even need 20. I mean, one would be enough.
Probably. But when you're the emperor, it's good to have a show of strength, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he's walking around with his spirit set as well, which is a whole nother story.
There you go. Well, yeah, we will talk about the spirit set and more about Kordaava himself at some point when we do a deeper delve into Emperor Kordaava. But for today, I hope that you have enjoyed our deeper delve into the Drasildar, and we hope you enjoy all our films. And please subscribe and turn on notifications.
Sin vigor and soldiers.
You're here at last.
Better not be a goddamn surprise, partner.